We've all heard the legend of Genghis Khan, the master strategist who united the steppe tribes into a single force and rose from a boyhood marked by hunger and betrayal to command the largest land empire history has ever seen. From the Pacific shores to the gates of Vienna, his name thundered across continents. Statues cast him in bronze. History books celebrate his genius on the battlefield. But those polished stories hide the darker machinery that powered his rise. Behind the cavalry charges and brilliant tactics lay something colder, a system that treated people as raw material. It was a ruthless arithmetic where terror and reproduction built the state as surely as steel and horses did. Few people talk about how sexual politics and calculated cruelty forged the Mongol war machine, or about the secret laws that ruled the men and women who lived and died inside the most feared court on earth. To uncover that hidden machinery, you have to look beyond the myth, into the records themselves. The secret history of the Mongols. The Persian chronicles of Rashid al-Din. The notes of European envoys, like John of Plano Carpini. They reveal a leader who understood that empires aren't built only with arrows, they're cemented with bloodlines, marriages, and the deliberate destruction of entire peoples. One practice became the blueprint for everything that followed, long before he ever wore the title of Khan. Temüjin burned with hatred for the Tatars, the tribe that had poisoned his father, Yesugei, and left his family destitute. By the year 1202, he was no longer a hunted orphan, but a rising conqueror. And when he finally cornered the last Tatar forces, his order was chillingly precise. Every male taller than the iron pin that held a cartwheel to its axle, roughly 3 feet, was to be executed on the spot. Imagine the scene. A boy is dragged forward, forced to stand beside a wagon as a guard measures him against the hub. One glance, and his fate is sealed. The massacre swept away thousands. Only the women were spared, and even then, not out of mercy. They were taken as spoils, folded into the households of Temüjin and his commanders. The most prominent and beautiful among them were taken as wives or concubines. Temüjin himself chose 2 Tatar sisters, Yesugei and Yesugei, to join his own camp. This wasn't uncontrolled vengeance. It was deliberate statecraft. The male line was to vanish. The female line would be absorbed. The Tatar name would be erased within a single generation. And once tested, that formula was repeated. Years earlier, the Merkits had raided Temüjin's camp and abducted his wife, Borte, a humiliation he never forgot. When his armies finally crushed the Merkit clan, their chief's widow, Toralki, was captured and later given to his 3rd son, Ogedei. That captive would one day serve as regent of the entire empire, ruling over princes and generals. Another step in the same design came with the Karates, former allies who had turned against him. After defeating them in 1203, Genghis took the brilliant Karate noblewoman Sorgatani Beki and arranged her marriage to his youngest son Talyui. From that union came Monk, Kublai, Hulagu, and Aragbok, 4 grandsons who would each rule vast dominions across China, Persia, and the Mongol heartland itself. A single political marriage had seeded an imperial dynasty. The message behind these acts was unmistakable: conquer, kill the men, take the women, and steal the future. By absorbing the defeated into his bloodline, Genghis ensured loyalty where none had existed, and wiped out any chance of rebellion from the old male elite. This brutal practice of slaughter and absorption became the silent cornerstone of Mongol expansion, as vital to its success as the horse archers or siege engines. But control over reproduction was only part of the system. To keep a realm that spanned half the known world from splintering, Genghis needed laws that reached into every household, a code that bound soldiers, courtiers, and herdsmen alike. In 1206, on the banks of the Onan River, a great cruelty gathered the chiefs of the steppe. Temüjin stood before them and was proclaimed Genghis Khan, ruler of all the Mongols. Along with his new title, he unveiled a hidden body of decrees known as the Asa. Unlike other legal codes, it wasn't carved in stone or written for public eyes. It was secret, known only to the Khan and his princes, but its reach was absolute, and its punishments were carried out for all to see. The Asa demanded loyalty, military discipline, and strict order in private life. Among its harshest rules were those governing sex and marriage. Adultery whether committed by a man or a woman, peasant or noble, was punishable by death. Persian chronicler Adam al-Javani, who later served at a Mongol court, wrote that while a man could take multiple wives and concubines, to even approach another man's wife was a capital crime. The same fate awaited two unmarried lovers if they were discovered together. No matter how willing both were, there was no forgiveness to buy. The Yasa's shadow stretched from the yurts of herders to the chambers of royal consorts, binding every subject in a web of secrecy and fear. These intertwined strategies, the erasure of male lines, the absorption of women, and the iron discipline of the Yasa, formed the hidden architecture of Genghis Khan's rise. They explain how a nomadic warlord became master of half the earth, and why the empire he built carried scars far deeper than the tracks of hooves across the steppe. And as we turn to the next practice recorded in the chronicles, the picture only grows darker. This was never about worship or lofty ideals. It was about keeping the army sharp and the steppe united. A quarrel over a woman could tear a company apart. A fighter distracted by lust or jealousy wasn't watching the enemy. Under the Yasa, women were treated as possessions, and that property was guarded with deadly certainty. But the law's grip went far beyond affairs. Death was also the sentence for sodomy, horse theft, treachery, desertion, or cowardice. Even small lapses could end a life. A rider who ignored something fallen from the man ahead could be executed on the spot. Relieving oneself in a river or spring meant death. Washing clothes or bathing in running water during a march could bring the same fate. These weren't senseless cruelties. They were survival strategies for an army that lived off the land. Polluted water could destroy a force faster than any sword. A foul camp meant sickness. One careless soldier endangered thousands. The Yasa worked like the code behind a living war machine, its punishments immediate and inevitable, molding a culture built on obedience and fear. From battle to bedroom, every act was scripted. That discipline allowed a once minor tribe to command vast mixed armies and seize an entire continent, order held in place by the constant threat of a swift, lonely death. If you prize stories carved from real chronicles, subscribe and stay with us. We're a lean crew, and every single subscription keeps these tales alive. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Genghis Khan's reach didn't stop at his soldiers. It radiated from his household, an immense, moving pillar of state. At its peak stood 4 principal wives, each a formidable authority. First among them was Borte, his companion since youth. After victories, he installed 3 more senior consorts taken from fallen rulers, Kalan of the Merkits, and the Tatar sisters Yesugei and Yesugei. Each queen presided over her own court, camp, and staggering wealth. These were the famed ordos, palaces on the move. They were mere tents, but roaming capitals pulsing with power and ambition. The great rolling palaces of Genghis Khan's queens weren't just tents. They were living cities, throbbing with trade, politics, and authority as they moved across the plains. Persian Vizier Rashid, who would later record the history of the Mongol Ilkhanate, described exactly how these grand ordos functioned. Each was assigned its own lands, its own dependents, and vast herds, horses, sheep, and camels numbering in the tens of thousands. They operated as self-contained economies, small empires on the move. Beneath the 4 principal queens stretched a rigid chain of rank. The Khan kept many lesser wives, and below them, hundreds of concubines, organized into companies of 30 or 40. By the end of his life, Genghis was said to have around 500 women in his personal retinue. Such an intricate machine required careful administration. Eunuchs taken from the courts of China and Persia served as guards, stewards, and tutors inside these female-led centers. But the women themselves were far from idle. They advised on policy, commanded networks of influence, and most importantly, bore the empire's heirs. The ordos were nurseries of power, the crucibles of succession. Borte's 4 sons, Joki, Chagatai, Ogdi, and Talyui, would each inherit a quarter of the vast realm. None of this was driven by affection or romance. It was about production, of heirs, of wealth, of authority. Each ordo stood as a living monument to the Khan's triumphs, fashioned from the human spoils of war. When Genghis Khan died in the summer of 1227, His dominion passed to his chosen successor, his third son, Ogdi. Yet Ogdi inherited far more than banners, armies, and treasuries. He also absorbed part of his father's household, including several junior wives. This was levirate marriage, an ancient steppe tradition, scaled up to imperial size by the Mongols. To foreign eyes, it was appalling. Franciscan envoy John of Plano Carpini, who visited the Mongol court in the 1240s, wrote about it with open horror. A man, he said, might marry as many women as he could support, and when his father died, he would take all of his father's widows, except, of course, his own mother. That was the only absolute boundary. No son could touch the woman who had borne him, but every other wife, his stepmothers, belonged to the estate, no different from livestock or tents. Love had no place in it. The goal was to keep wealth, followers, and alliances inside the bloodline. Every noble woman brought with her herds, attendants, and political leverage. Levirate marriage ensured all of that stayed locked within the clan. After Genghis's death, Ogdi brought several of his father's widows into his own encampment. One woman, named Inkatun, was later gifted to a trusted general, proof that even these royal consorts, once inherited, could be traded as rewards for loyalty. The custom didn't end there. When Ogdi died, his son Gayuk absorbed the remnants of his harem, and when Hulagu carved out a dynasty in Persia, he too practiced levirate marriage, weaving inherited wives into his own order. It was a pattern that repeated for generations, a closed circuit where women, power, and fortune flowed from father to son, ensuring that not a shred of influence ever leaked beyond the lineage. This is the point where policy turned into pure, calculated terror. The Mongol assault on the rich Khwarezmian Empire in 1219 began with a single act of defiance. A Mongol trade mission was seized in Otra, and its members were slaughtered. Genghis Khan sent envoys demanding restitution. The Shah's answer was an outrage. One envoy executed, the others humiliated, their beards hacked away. To the Khan, that wasn't just an insult. It was a challenge to his power. His reply wasn't merely war. It was annihilation on a scale no one had yet imagined. What followed was warfare designed not only to crush resistance, but to erase entire civilizations. Among the tools of that destruction was organized sexual violence, used deliberately to break a people's spirit. Persian chroniclers Yesugei and Ibn al-Athir, who witnessed the aftermath, wrote of it without disguise. Whenever a city defied the Khan and finally fell, the same terrible choreography unfolded. First, the entire population was driven beyond the walls. Artisans, smiths, scribes, and engineers, the skilled, were separated and spared, living spoils bound for Mongolia to strengthen the empire. Next came the division of the most beautiful women and the youngest children, claimed by the warriors as concubines and servants. What remained was the trembling mass, the old, the weak, the unskilled. And then the killing began. But before the sword or the arrow came humiliation. Soldiers committed mass rape in plain view of husbands, fathers, and children. It was systematic degradation, meant to crush resistance forever. It happened in Bokhara, in Samarkand, in every fortress that dared to defy. Urgench fought so fiercely that when it finally fell, the Mongols slaughtered its people, then breached the dikes of the Amu Darya, drowning the ruins to erase every trace of life. At Nishapur, in April 1221, tragedy reached its darkest depth. An arrow from the city walls had killed Takucher, a royal son-in-law. His widow, Genghis's own daughter, demanded revenge so absolute that nothing living should remain. Historian Yesugei records that to ensure no one merely feigned death, every person, even dogs and cats, was decapitated. Their skulls were stacked into ghastly towers. The claim that 7 million perished strains belief, but even the number itself speaks to the unimaginable scale of the destruction. This was not mindless slaughter. It was calculated terror, a warning to the next city. Surrender at the first sight of the Mongol standard, or be erased. Each act of horror meshed with the others, gears in a single, ruthless engine. The Yasa's iron code molded soldiers into disciplined weapons. That army waged wars of extermination, capturing untold thousands of women. Through mass marriages and concubinage, those captives were absorbed, their identities stripped, their bloodlines woven into the expanding fabric of the Mongol elite. Inside the great ordos, the rolling palaces of the queens, they produced heirs. And through levirate marriage, those heirs inherited not only wealth and herds, but also their father's surviving wives, consolidating every last asset within the clan. Conquest, absorption, reproduction. A cycle that fueled the most explosive imperial expansion history had ever seen. The cities the Mongols burned have long since risen again. The secret text of the Yasa is gone. The grand ordos, once parading across the steppe, have faded into legend. Yet something endures, silent, indelible, carried in the cells of millions. In 2003, a team led by geneticist Chris Tyler Smith published a landmark study in the American Journal of Human Genetics. Analyzing Y chromosome data from across Asia, they found an extraordinary lineage. A single paternal signature passed almost unchanged from father to son. It was present in about 8% of men living across what was once the Mongol Empire. Globally, that's roughly half of 1% of the entire male population, around 16 million men alive today. Using mutation rates, the researchers traced that lineage to one common ancestor who lived in Mongolia roughly 1,000 years ago. The data couldn't specify a name. Genetics can't attach a historical label to DNA. But only one figure fits the time, the place, and the sheer scope needed to leave such an imprint. Genghis Khan, and the sons who carried his conquests across continents. His wars, his laws, his household, the vast machinery of his rule, left behind not just chronicles or ruins, but a biological empire, stretching from the Pacific to the Caspian. The chroniclers wrote his victories. The palaces crumbled into dust. Yet the bloodline, silent, invisible, flowing through the veins of millions, remains the last unalterable line in the Khan's account book. Land and cities can be lost. Archives can burn. But genes endure. Hidden inside humanity itself lies Genghis Khan's final dominion, not carved in stone or inked on parchment, but encoded in living flesh. A legacy as vast and unyielding as the steppe he once rode.